All right, today is it's actually a pretty cool day because we get to expand your number system. All the numbers that you know right now, all the numbers that you've learned in school so far, there's more. So it's pretty fun. So we'll jump in here and get into this. It'll make more sense once we start talking. So we want to solve this equation. So let's look at this first one. X squared equals 16. Well, we know to solve for x, we're going to take the square root of both sides. And remember, anytime you introduce the square root into the problem, you need a plus or minus. So our answer is plus or minus 4. All right, no problem. Going on to B, we take the square root of both sides, and we would say, oh, well, we can't take the square root of a negative number. So always before we said, oh, there's no real solution. Okay, that's what we said in Algebra 1. Said, good enough. We can't take the square root of a negative number. Well, not so fast. We were correct in saying there's no real solution, but there are other numbers out there, imaginary numbers and complex numbers. So pop down here for a minute. I want to introduce you to a new number. This new number is I. I is the square root of -1. Okay, and it is an imaginary number. That's what it's called. It's a little bit of an unfortunate name. It's not imaginary like unicorns and leprechauns or something. It's just that in addition to real numbers, we called everything real numbers, and so now we have imaginary numbers. Also, we can write any number you know as a complex number. A complex number is a plus bi. We call this a, that's the real part. And then the bi, that is the imaginary part. Now, every number you know so far has just been a real number. Like I really like the number 3. Technically, that's a complex number because it's 3 plus 0i. Or let's say the number -pi. Well, technically that's -pi plus 0i. So any number can be written as a complex number. Sometimes there's just imaginary parts like 5i. And sometimes there's just real parts like 3. And then complex numbers are going to have both. So like 2 plus 5i or something like that. So we'll get into complex numbers here in a minute. But let's back up to this thing. Because we now have this number, I is a square root of -1, we can do this problem. So the square root of -9, that's the same thing as the square root of 9 times the square root of -1. And so that is 3, and the square root of -1 is I. Oh, and remember, anytime you introduce the square root, you need plus or minus. So our answer is plus or minus 3i. So we do have a solution to this problem. We just need to use imaginary numbers. So let's check out the next one. We're going to take the square root of both sides. So x is plus or minus, and we can split this into the square root of 5 times the square root of -1. So x is going to be plus or minus root 5i. I sometimes write that as plus or minus I root 5. It doesn't matter what order you write it in. All right, let's do this one. We're going to take the square root of both sides. So x equals, again, it's going to be plus or minus. We have root, that was supposed to be a 72. I apologize for that. 72 and the square root of -1. Now we can simplify 72. We can do like a factor tree on it. Let me put the factor tree over here. 72 is 2 and 36. Oh, and 36 is 6 and 6. Okay, so we can bring out a 6. So x is plus or minus 6. This 2 stays inside. I'm going to bring the I out here. So it's plus or minus 6i root 2. So welcome to imaginary numbers. So just remember that I is the square root of -1. And then if we square both sides, I squared, if you square this, is just going to be -1. Those are going to be the two important parts of this. Now that we know that we have things called complex numbers, we can add, subtract, multiply, and divide complex numbers. We can raise them to powers, and we can take the square roots. when we do powers and square roots, we only do it on the imaginary parts. It can get more complicated. We'll talk about that more next year in trig, but let's just go to adding and subtracting. So we have two complex numbers here, 4 minus 7i and negative 11 plus 9i. To add these, it's like terms, okay? You're going to add the real parts, and then you're going to add the imaginary parts. So we get negative 7 plus 2i. That's it. When we subtract them, same idea, except we're going to have to distribute that negative. So that's negative 2 plus 5i. And then this one can just stay the same. So we're going to add the real parts. We get 4. We're going to add the imaginary parts. So 4 plus 13i. All right, we're going to distribute that negative again. So 4 minus I. So when you subtract, you make sure you distribute the negative. Otherwise, everything's the same. So add the real parts. Add the imaginary parts, negative 2i, and negative I is going to be negative 3i. All right, in the next video, we'll talk about how to multiply complex numbers.